Good morning. Very happy to be here. Thank you, Glow. Thank you to the Creative Mornings team for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit today about tarot as a resource for creativity. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with tarot in storytelling and tarot as a tool for self-reflection. I believe that tarot can be used to access creativity and wisdom that lies buried within us. And I believe that now, more than ever, the world needs the creativity and the wisdom that is buried within us. What is tarot? Tarot is, in its essence, a deck of cards. It's a deck of 78 cards consisting of two different sets of cards, sets of kinds of cards. So there's the minor arcana and the major arcana. The minor, and I'm actually going to pass this deck around. This is the traditional, probably most widely used deck. It's called the Rider-Waite deck. So feel free to just check out some of the images. There's some cards in there that are missing that I replaced with other cards and wrote in Sharpie, so ignore those. The minor arcana are actually patterned and structured exactly like a deck of playing cards. In fact, modern playing cards evolved from tarot. So there are 10 cards, numbered cards, ace to 10, and then there's court cards in 4 suits. Then there's the major arcana, which starts with the Fool and ends with the World. So there are 22 of the major arcana, and they represent the journey of the soul through life. The hero's journey, the soul's journey, the fool's journey. The first known tarot decks date from 1400s Italy, and there's some speculation that it might actually be much older than that, because a lot of the imagery on the woodblock prints from the 1400s actually stems from ancient Egypt. So there's a little bit of a mystery as to the origin of the tarot as well. Many different artists have added their interpretations to tarot and have created different decks, many different kinds of decks. So there's literally hundreds, if not possibly thousands, of tarot decks to choose from. So I'm going to be showing images from many different of my favorite decks. The most of what you'll see is probably from the Rider-Waite, which is being passed around. And the Rider-Waite was actually painted in 1910 by a woman named Pamela Coleman Smith. Now, why it's not called the Pamela Coleman Smith deck is another conversation. But the minor arcana, so the 4 suits of the minor arcana start with wands. And wands correspond to clubs in playing cards. And they represent the element of fire and the energy of creativity and action. Then we have swords, which correspond to spades in playing cards. And they represent the element of air and the quality of mental thought and activity and intellect. There's also the cups, and the cups correspond with the heart in a playing card deck, and they represent the energy of love and the element of water. And finally, we have the pentacles, or in this deck, stones, which represent the element of earth and the energy of health and the body and material security. This is a deck that just came out. It's called the Slow Holler deck, and it is a collective of queer Southern artists who put out a deck called Slow Holler, so I encourage you to check that one out. So in further interpreting the cards beyond the suits, actually I'll go back to stones for a second, there's also the numbers that correspond. So for example, the aces represent the energy of new beginnings. So you juxtapose the ace with the stones, and you have a symbol of new beginnings, maybe a new money-making opportunity, or new beginnings in your health. And you can kind of flesh out the meaning of different cards depending on the other cards that are around them. So similarly, for example, the Three of Cups. This is a great deck. I love Morgan Greer. The Three of Cups, the threes represent group dynamics, and the cups represent love. So the Three of Cups represents love shared in community. So the name of this card is Celebration. In the major arcana, we have the Fool. This is a Twin Peaks tarot. I've got any Twin Peaks fans out there. The Fool represents the soul. And the Fool's journey, the Fool starts out with absolutely no guile, no motivation, no direction. He's completely innocent, and as you can see, he's literally stepping off a cliff. So the Fool has a great energy of potential and excitement, and definitely new beginnings. And on his journey, he encounters many different archetypes, and he learns many different lessons. So for example, he encounters the High Priestess. This is a deck called Mythic Tarot, which is based on Greek mythology. It's a great deck. So that's Persephone in this deck. So the High Priestess is the energy of wisdom and mystery and initiation. He also encounters the Chariot, and the Chariot represents harnessing your power towards a destination. He encounters archetypes like the Wheel of Fortune, which represents luck and kind of a lucky stroke and good fortune, and also the wisdom that everything that goes up must come down. So the Fool goes on this journey of the 20 different archetypes that he encounters. This is, I'm not sure if this is actually 1700s. I think it might be earlier, but I went down the Google rabbit hole, and at a certain point you just have to put a number on it and walk away. This represents the beginning and the end, the Fool and the world. So the Fool goes through all of this whole journey, and he meets all these different characters and archetypes, and he learns all these lessons. And he has loss, and he has grief. And then finally, when he learns all of these lessons, he arrives at the world. And the world represents total integration, total oneness. It represents completion and unity with creation. And in the universe of Tarot, we recognize time as cyclical. So once the Fool reaches his destination and merges with the world, he's born again, and he becomes a Fool again, and the journey begins anew. So there really are no hard and fast rules about how to read tarot cards. A lot of people read a Celtic cross spread, which is a 10-card spread. Some people do a 3-card past, present, future spread. Some people pull 1 card at a time. Some people pull a lot of different cards at a time. There really are no rules in tarot, and that's something I really want to impart to you today. The images are just a jumping off point for your imagination. And I think that's the really most important thing that I really want to impart to you about tarot, is that the images serve as a way to kind of bypass the chatter of your mind and speak directly to your heart and soul. I believe it was Carl Jung who said, the soul speaks in images. And so if we can kind of get past this, our mental chatter, and really get to what our soul is trying to tell us, I believe tarot provides a tool for that. Got my cups, my goblet. So I want to speak a little bit to synchronicity, because synchronicity is a very important principle in the study of tarot. And again, our friend Carl Jung coined this term synchronicity, and his understanding of synchronicity is that just as things can be related through cause and effect, they can also be related through meaning. So a meaningful coincidence is, to me, the heart of the divination aspect of tarot. I don't personally believe, and I think a lot of people who read tarot don't necessarily believe, that there's a supernatural hand that's causing you to choose one card or another card, to shuffle the cards and order them in any certain order. I believe it's really your own mind and your own intuition that's leading you to sort of interpret cards that you're given to find the meaning in your own life. And I think that's, again, one of the most important functions of tarot, is that it helps us to externalize our own experiences and see them in front of us so that we can work with them and assimilate them and ultimately learn from the lessons of our lives. So it's a practice of self-reflection. And it has it's very rich, like all inner work, it's very rich in rewards, emotional and spiritual and intellectual rewards. I believe that a lot of us in this culture operate from an outside-in perspective. We're encouraged to do that. We're encouraged to see ourselves as how we're seen by others, rather than seeing ourselves from the inside out. And I think that that generates a certain emptiness when you start to see when you're only seeing yourself as an amalgamation of all the ways that people see you, then you're really nothing more than a hologram. And that becomes a really empty feeling, and there becomes a craving for who am I at my core? What is my purpose? Why am I here? And that requires that you start operating from the inside out to begin answering those questions. But how do you get in there? How do you tap into the mystery of who you are at your core? Well, I think tools like meditation and tarot help you to get there. And I do think that true creativity comes from that place. I think a lot of people also think that, real creative people are somewhere else. That, oh, well, I'm not creative, but you're creative. But we're all creative. And creativity doesn't come from other people. It doesn't come from other cultures. It comes from your own experience and your own story. So I want to address also that the tarot, a lot of people have a lot of fear around tarot because it has some really stark images. For example, the Three of Swords. The Three of Swords, the name of this card is Heartbreak. And there's just no ambiguity. It is like it's raining and storming, and the swords are piercing the heart, and it's devastation. It's total devastation. There's no silver lining except for the fact that if you pull this card and you can look inside yourself and say, yeah, I'm struggling with heartbreak. That friend I lost a couple of years ago has really been on my mind, and I really need to look at that and deal with that and process that. That's the silver lining of the dark cards. There's cards like Death, which, as Lisa Simpson discovered, does not actually mean any pending actual death, but really is about what do I need to let die in my life? What change am I ready to make in my life? And so it's true that tarot does have a lot of stark imagery, but so do you, right? I mean, we have fears and we have demons and we have nightmares. And when we can look at those fears and demons and nightmares externalized in front of us and sort of feel the charge around them a little bit, but sort of in a safe way, then we can more easily integrate our shadow, which is another Carl Jung concept. So integrating the shadow, I believe, is really, really important aspect of inner work. And I think that when you're able to do that, when you're able to see your not so shiny parts and sort of incorporate them into who you are and accept them and bring them in, maybe give them a job, maybe let them sit at the table a little bit, even though they might not be that fun, then you really create a more whole, you become a more whole person. I also think that if you do that, you're less likely to project your shadow onto other people, which I believe is the cause of a lot of the abuse and injustice in the world today. So, in short, I feel, well, not yet. Okay. In short, I feel that we all deserve to center ourselves as the hero of our own story. We all deserve to see our own stories as epic. And I relate to tarot in terms, I've had many stories, epic stories in my life, but one of my most epic journeys was writing the book Cake Ladies. So in 2010, when I wrote this book, like the fool, I was on a precipice. I had just opened Short Street Cakes less than a year before. My son was 4 years old, and my husband of 8 years and I had just separated. So I was very much in at the beginning of a journey. And like the fool at that time, I received a call to adventure in the form of Nicole McConville. Where is she? There she is. Hi, Nicole. So at the time, Nicole was working, speaking of synchronicity, in this very building as an editor for Lark Books. She was also a customer at the cake shop. And she, I think through blogging and just our conversations, she asked me if I had ever thought about writing a book. And as it turned out, I had. I'd been thinking a lot about the lineage of Southern Cake Ladies and how I was a part of that, and how There were women all over the South who served their communities and as cake ladies, and also used cake as a way to lift themselves up and to create and form an identity that centered around love and sharing food. And I was very intrigued by that and really wanted to interview these women and collect their stories and their recipes. So I expressed that to Nicole, and she was like, well, you need to write a proposal. And like the fool, I denied the call. And I said, no, I don't have time to write a book. My life is too crazy. Absolutely not. A few years maybe. And she said, no, I really think you need to write a proposal. So I somewhat reluctantly did. And thanks to Nicole's advocacy and mentorship, I was able to receive a book deal and set out that summer on my own very epic journey. Oh wait, I'm still here. Okay. So on that journey, traveling the South, meeting cake ladies, I definitely encountered archetypes of goddesses and priestesses in the form of the cake ladies. I encountered magical lovers, I had mystical experiences, and I had a lot of loss and heartbreak. After that journey, I also experienced an immense creative outpouring, unlike anything I really have ever experienced before or since. But eventually that journey ended, and I came home. And like this image relates to Odysseus coming back from the Odyssey, and he comes back completely transformed. And I, like Odysseus, came back completely transformed. I had the very unexpected fortune of my husband and I's older and wiser selves falling in love again. And that was the completion of that journey for me. And I was reborn, and a new journey started again. But I knew at that time that I had to tell this story, if for no other reason than for me to be able to assimilate the lessons that I had learned and really understand them. And so I began, well, for the 6 subsequent years, I scribbled copious notes, and I have a file this big of little notes about this memoir that I wanted to write. And when I was able to sell my shop last year to Olga, I set out to do just that. And so I've been writing a memoir called My Life in Cake. And again, speaking of synchronicity, at the moment that I was writing the chapter about tarot, which was, and about the magician, I got the call to give this talk. So I'm basing the chapters of my story on each of the major arcana in the tarot deck. So to honor that synchronicity, I'd like to talk a little bit about the magician. So the magician represents magic. He's the first person that the fool encounters on his journey. So the fool sets off a cliff. He has no idea where he's going. He's got his little dog with him. And then he comes upon this magician. And the magician says, so the fool he doesn't know his own power yet. But the magician says, look, you have power. You have tools. And if you see, all the 4 elements of the suits are here: the cups, the pentacles, the swords, and the wands. And he says, look, you have cups that you can fill. You can fill other people's cups. You can use this sword and fight, or maybe it's a pen and you can write. You can use the earth in your body to make things and build things. You can light a fire. You have power. So the magician learns in that moment that he actually has power, but in order for him to utilize that power, he has to see the tools and he has to pick them up and use them. And so that's really the message that I want to share today, is that you have power and you have tools at your disposal, but it requires that you pick up the tools, see the tools that are in front of you, identify them, and then pick them up and use them. So I find it really interesting to be giving this talk at this moment in history. Another name for the major arcana are the trump cards. And that's actually where the word trump came from. It's Italian for trionfi, which means triumph. So we know that the major arcana have a higher value in tarot or they have more weight than the minor arcana. So they trump the minor cards. There's another definition of trump related to the word trumpery, which means trickery or deceit. It also means something that's very showy but of little value. telling you the facts. And, but a third interpretation in the universe of Tarot is this card, Judgment, which is actually the second to last card. And it's actually called the trump because it is Gabriel blowing a trumpet. So in the universe of Tarot, this card represents a call to action and an awakening. And it's based on the biblical description in Corinthians of Gabriel blowing his trumpet and the dead rising and people rising from the dead. It represents a sea change and a call that cannot be ignored. And I'll read you the verse in the Bible that this image is based on. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised, and we shall all be changed. So I know that this is a fearful time for a lot of people, and I want to be real about that. It's a fearful time for me as well. But again, in the universe of Tarot, we know that time is cyclical. We have been here before. And we know that love is stronger than fear. And we know that creativity, at its core, at its best, is an act of love. And therefore, any act of creativity, true creativity that comes from within you, in a time when the powers that be are bent on destruction, an act of creativity becomes an act of rebellion and resistance. So after the Fool successfully meets the challenge of judgment and rises to the call and wakes up, he arrives at his final destination, the world, unity, completion, integration. It's a new world. So I just want to leave you with some questions. What could happen if we heed the call to use our creativity to craft a new world? What would happen if you garnered your resources? What would happen if you reached inside of yourself? What would happen if you sat with your pain and you sat with your inspiration and you picked up your tools, no matter how foolish or unworthy you might feel, because your work becomes worthy by you being brave enough to take the journey? What will you do with these sticks and these stones? How will you serve love? What will fill your cup? How will you fill the cups of others? Is the sword in your hand actually a paintbrush or a feather or a pen to write a new story? Thank you.